Why are so many people who sign up to serve their country in the U.S. military having to endure the misery of sexual assault? You're watching Inside Story Americas from Washington. Hello, I'm Kimberly Halkett. The numbers are stark. According to the results of an anonymous survey released this week, 26,000 members of the U.S. military were sexually assaulted last year. That's a significantly higher number than the official figures, which show there were more than 3,000 assaults last year, a rise of 6% since 2012. So not only is the problem growing, it seems the vast majority of cases go unreported. And lawmakers are becoming increasingly concerned about how the military court system deals with sexual crimes, as Tom Ackerman reports.
The Pentagon estimates that up to 26,000 uniformed personnel were victims of everything from rape to abusive sexual contact last year, but only about 3,300 ever filed complaints. Anonymous surveys included many who said they never reported the incidents for fear of retaliation. Officials have been trying to deal with a rising incidence of sexual assault by expanding training and increasing victims assistance programs and making changes to the military justice system.
We need cultural change where every service member is treated with dignity and respect.
President Barack Obama, the U.S. Commander-in-Chief, expressed his outrage at the worsening level of sexual misconduct.
I don't want just more speeches or awareness programs or training, but ultimately folks look the other way. If we find out somebody's engaging in this stuff, they got to be held accountable.
But top ranks within the Pentagon threatened to undercut the crackdown. On Sunday, the newly appointed head of the Air Force Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Unit was arrested for allegedly groping a woman in a parking lot while he was intoxicated. Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Krasinski has been removed from his post pending an investigation. And for the second time in 18 months, an Air Force general has set aside a sexual assault conviction of a fellow officer. As a result, Lieutenant General Susan Helms has had her promotion at the U.S. Space Command put on hold.
If a victim does not believe that the system is capable of believing her, there's no point in risking your entire career.
Victims advocates say fundamental reforms require disciplining offenders outside the traditional military chain of command.
Put this into a system, a separate, unbiased, impartial system of justice where victims feel safe to come forward and report. Until then, I don't think you're going to see any real change.
Bills introduced in Congress would address that problem, but Defense Secretary Hagel says the culture of impunity can be changed without disrupting the existing command authority. Tom Ackerman, Al Jazeera, Washington.
For more in our studio, we have Morris Davis, a former U.S. military lawyer who served as chief prosecutor at Guantanamo Bay. He now teaches law at Howard University. And in San Francisco, we have Kate Weber. She is a former U.S. military soldier who was raped by a senior officer while stationed in Germany in 1993. Ms. Weber, I want to start with you. Talk to us a little bit about your experience. You were a victim of assault when you were in the Army. What happened when you tried to report that sexual assault?
Well, I was only 18 years old. I joined the Army when I was 17, and at the time of my rape, I was only in the military for 6 months. I had actually been in Germany for 1 week. So I was a brand new private in a foreign country with no exposure to what the routine would be if someone were to assault me, stalk me. I had no idea. So when the rape happened, I told another soldier who was considered my battle buddy. She was a 30-year-old woman who was there to make sure I was taken care of. When I reported it to her and I told her the rapist's name, she told me she knows him. He has a pregnant wife, and he wouldn't do that. He was in a program called the Masons, a Christian sort of program. So that was the shield that I was immediately aware of, was that this gentleman had been on the space for several years, had a lot of acquaintances, whereas I was brand new on the space. So when she responded to me so negatively, and didn't believe anything I was saying. She left me actually in a situation where I was in a medical crisis, and she went straight to my rapist's office and confronted him in front of his coworkers. Meanwhile, I went to my unit and started to go up the chain of command, speaking to a woman and reporting to this to a woman first would make sense. That did not work out. It was just another rejection that she knew him and I'm brand new. It would be best that I kept, minded my P's and Q's and didn't ruffle any feathers.
And did you
so
find
that
when you, not only were you not taken seriously, but did you find from that point on that you were retaliated against in any way?
Yeah, yes. I don't particularly know that people in my unit fully knew the extent of my injuries or the trauma. I was made to show up in formation the next day as if nothing had happened, and my rapist was in the building next to mine. I was continuing to be stationed on that base for 9 months, and I didn't seek, I did seek medical attention, but I didn't receive anything from the military leadership in my unit or in the medical brigade that I went to report my injuries. The lieutenant colonel that screened me wrote in my medical record, patient states she was sexually assaulted yesterday. However, he didn't examine me, and I was pretty much silenced at that point, and over a 9-month period, I gained 10 pounds. I was super depressed, just had a very difficult time moving forward.
And ultimately, what did this do to your military career?
So I was discharged honorably 9 months after my rape. My DD-214 discharge paperwork says honorable weight control failure. And I know I had mental health issues after the rape, and I know I gained 10 pounds, but I have all 12 months worth of counseling statements that show that that very last time that I was, my height and weight was measured, my height was altered by 1 inch, so I was 1 inch shorter.
Colonel Morris Davis, I wanted to kind of talk to you about Ms. Weber's story. I mean, how uncommon is it in light of this survey that has just come out from the Department of Defense? We know that this is not an isolated case, is it?
No. And Kate, I'm sorry about what happened to you, and I really appreciate you speaking up about it. This has been a problem that has gone on for far too long. We've had, Kate mentioned her incident was in 1993. We've had Tailhook in Aberdeen. I was in charge of the investigation at the Air Force Academy in 2003, so it was a decade ago. And here we are, we're still confronting those same issues over and over and over. And it seems that it's a pattern that just keeps repeating. It gets attention when it boils up and it becomes a problem, and then it kind of fades away and we repeat this cycle over and over. So we've really got to get a grip on this issue and get it fixed so that there's not another Kate, another 18-year-old in this same situation again.
But is it a problem that's repeating itself, or is it a problem that's getting worse? Because when you look at those numbers, 26,000 victims in 2012, that is a sharp rise.
It's a tough nut to crack, because this is, sexual assault and rape is an offense that, not just in the military, but in society in general, is grossly underreported. I know, like at the Air Force Academy, when we did the investigation there was a sudden spike after, and it wasn't clear if there were more incidents or more people that felt comfortable coming forward to report incidents. So it's really hard to get your hands around reliable data. But the numbers are far too great. And I agree with Secretary Hagel's comment that, this is a tough problem. It's a multifaceted issue we've got to approach from a number of different fronts. But the bottom line is we've got to change this culture, that this is one team and one fight, and you don't prey on your teammates, and this kind of behavior is not going to be tolerated.
But is it also an issue of the military justice system as well that may be part of the reason so many of these things, if they are reported, are not being prosecuted? I want to kind of take a look at the U.S. system. Now, in the criminal justice system for civilians, you have separate groups in charge of investigation, prosecution, and sentencing. But in the U.S. military, All three roles are under the control of the officer commanding the unit in which the offender and the victim both work. Now, if the accused chooses to be tried by a military panel, panel members are selected by the commander and not randomly chosen, as in the civilian system. If the accused is found guilty, the commander has to approve both the findings and the sentence. In this role, the commander can even set aside the verdict. Well, in Canada, the UK, and Australia, authority over criminal cases has been transferred from the commanding officer to an independent prosecutor. Now, U.S. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel has called on the military to remove the power to overturn court-martial decisions from commanders. Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand says she'll even introduce such a bill next week. Her bill also seeks to allow victims of serious offenses such as sexual assault to report directly to military prosecutors who will determine whether court action is appropriate. This avoids reporting to a commander who knows both the victim and the offender. So, Colonel Davis, I want to talk to you about this a little bit, because as it stands right now, is the chain of command preventing many of these cases not just from being reported, but from even being prosecuted?
Yeah, it's a tough issue. I mean, for commander, the commander is responsible for good order and discipline of his or her unit. And the system has to be portable, so when we go to war, that the commander can maintain, accountability and responsibility for his or her troops. So it's a difficult, situation to fix, taking the commander completely out of the loop. I can tell you a lot of commanders are uncomfortable. This is for them an additional duty, in addition to flying planes and driving tanks and ships and all the other things that commanders do. Discipline is just a small fraction of it, and particularly sexual assault and rape cases are even a subset of that. So a lot of them are uncomfortable, but trying to strike the balance between a system that's responsive to sexual assault victims and a system that enables commanders to maintain good order and discipline is the challenge here.
What's your take, Ms. Weber? Do you feel that the chain of command is part of the problem that leads to many victims, male or female, not reporting?
Yes. I've actually, I recently did a screening of the Invisible War movie at an active duty base. And it was a room full of leadership, 70 or so, and it was a majority male audience who watched the film and then asked some of the most amazing questions afterward. But some of the statements they made were, this is really how training should be, so we can go home with really a piece of what you've gone through, so we can understand what we're preventing, rather than a PowerPoint kind of presentation, So with regard to training and such, while I was at that base, I had an opportunity to ask a few commanders if this is something they wanted to do with their military careers. Was being the deciding factor in a sexual assault case something that they had wanted to do in their lifetime? Was that on your bucket list? And the answer is no. There are commanders who are willing to learn more about it, and I do appreciate that very much, but we're way past that. I am 38 years old. 20 years ago when I joined the military, it was after the tailhook scandal. And the things that we go through now as a result, emotional triggers all over the place. I can only tell you, like when I went into the Department of Veterans Affairs to seek recourse for having been raped in the military, the room I was sitting in was a retired lieutenant colonel who had a patch on his wall that said tailhook. I wasn't there, I didn't see it, I don't know anything. And it had a picture of Bart Simpson grabbing the back end of a woman's thong underwear, and her boobs were pouring out of her shirt. And to think that insinuation that would be a joke to anybody, when I'm a committee member on Protect Our Defenders board with someone who was a victim of that sexual crime at tailhook.
So you're saying that the issue is that there's a culture that needs to change, and it starts with proper training.
Yeah, can I jump in? Yeah,
sure. Right, and it does.
As Kate said,
yeah.
I mean, I came up in that culture. I joined in 1983. When I joined, we still had officers' clubs that on Friday night had strippers. Or you go down to the squadrons, there were centerfolds hanging up on the wall. And now women make up, at least in the Air Force, about 1 in 5 members of the Air Force are women. And I can tell you, just from having tweeted about this over the last couple of weeks, I still get people, saying women don't belong in the military. There's no place for women. What they expect when they put women with men. And it's just that old boy, that boys club mentality.
But sometimes, in the case of Air Force Lieutenant General Susan Helms, who recently overturned an aggravated sexual assault conviction, it's not just the men that are responsible, perhaps, for some of these.
And that's certainly not the fix. I mean, when we did the Air Force Academy investigation, one of the problems was a senior officer who was female. So this notion that if we put a female in certain key positions, that's going to fix the problem is not necessarily the case. It's got to be people that are committed to changing the culture, that we're one team, one fight. We don't prey on our teammates. And we're not going to tolerate this kind of behavior.
So how do you change the culture? Because many would argue, look, at the military, it's no secret, is still predominantly filling its ranks with men. These are not going to be your most touchy-feely type of guys that are going to be known for being super sensitive. These are people that are trained to go fight wars. And there is this argument that I have heard from rank-and-file members of the military who they would certainly not come on this program and say it, but would privately say, well, the women knew what they were getting into. They certainly run the risk when you put yourself in a situation where you're going to be in the minority. Right. How do you change that mindset?
Well, the military prides itself on its standards and its integrity and the things that set it apart from civilian society. We've got to live that. We can't just talk about it and put on our ribbons and put on a parade and look professional. We've got to be committed to this kind of behavior is not tolerated. Because in the past, I can tell you, it was kind of a wink and a nod. And like Kate was talking about, the patch with, from Tailhook, it's the kind of thing that, in the old days, somebody would walk by and probably give you a thumbs up for having that on your wall. We've got to get past that. This is 2013. This isn't the 1950s. And we've got to change that culture that everybody is a key part of the team. And if you prey on your teammate, then you're not part of the team. And we can't tolerate just, kind of paying attention when this boils up and then putting it on the back burner and ignoring it next year.
So, Ms. Weber, you're certainly advocating for change now. How do you see that change coming about in seeing the change in culture? Is it something that can come from within the military, the U.S. military, or is it something that has to come from the outside in terms of legislation from Congress? Because we certainly mentioned there are now efforts to bring about change. Do you think that's the only way there will be the kind of accountability you're looking for?
Yeah, I think we need to make some new military occupational specialties for social workers, rape crisis interventionists, people who are forensically trained nurses who practice sexual assault DNA collection on a regular basis. I think we need to facilitate a safe house on each military base all over the country and overseas. I don't believe that even I don't even believe that civilian dependents are safe. When I think about what was just said by General
when you say that, I got to jump in for a second, because do you think then that you're not satisfied with the military system of justice, that there should be access to the civilian system?
What I'm saying is that you can put a civilian into a military job that is fully trained in handling and helping that victim. It would be an honor for somebody to be able to come into the military as a social worker or a PhD and be given the task of helping put structure together and wraparound services together to support the victims, because nothing's in place right now. There's nothing. They call it SAPRO or SARC. And even in my interviewing some of the SAPRO leaders on the different military bases, they say they don't have enough JAG officers to prosecute sexual assault. So no wonder they're plea bargaining people out with other than honorable discharges, which, by the way, entitles them in some way to sit in the same waiting room as I do at the Department of Veterans Affairs and receive benefits. If not, that person may be entitled to benefits as the rapist because he got away with it or plea bargained, whereas me as the victim may have been discharged other than honorably and not be entitled to any benefits. So I'll never seek recourse. I'd never get help.
So, Colonel,
so we've had to.
Oh, let me just jump in here.
We've had to work very hard to. to get the VA system to pick up the slack where the Department of Defense has failed us.
The Veterans Affairs system. Colonel Davis, I want to ask you, there are these legislative pushes now. Right. There's the push to strip U.S. military commanders of power to decide if sexual assaults should be prosecuted. Mm-hmm. How likely do you think that would be to be successful? If that legislation were to become law, could that really be a tipping point or a turning point?
Well, the military justice system that we have, we largely inherited from the British centuries ago. We've modified it over time. The Uniform Code of Military Justice was in 1950, so it's over 60 years old. So I think it is in need of being brought into the modern age. But again, I think striking this balance between a commander's responsibility for good order and discipline and a unit that's ready to fight and being responsive to victims of crime is a tough one to balance. I can tell you in 2003, there was talk, there were legislative hearings. We went through this whole process back a decade ago. A lot of folks in the military kind of roll their eyes that Congress thinks they're going to fix this through legislation. That in many ways, they look at it as being a feel-good program for Congress. Because you've got many of them. We just elected Mark Sanford, hiking the Appalachian Trail, governor of South Carolina. And you have people like, David Vitter, who was caught, with a prostitute here in Washington. So a lot of military folks look at Congress and say, wait a minute, they're going to tell us how to fix our morals and our character. I think it's got to be from the inside. We've got to fix this.
And that's what the Secretary of Defense, Chuck Hagel, is saying. There were many that were very disappointed with his reluctance to kind of establish an independent authority to prosecute sexual assaults. Do you think it's because those within the military simply would not respect that structure, that it needs to come within to be binding and to be effective?
Yeah, I think there's a resistance to something being forced on them by Congress, that Congress is going to fix the problem with the legislation. And again, I think, commanders are responsible for their unit being able to fight. So I think you've got to somehow strike that balance to where commanders still have some say in the process. But I think part of the fix, in addition to the cultural change, is having, as Kate mentioned, about having a safe house. I think there's got to be, particularly, the military environment is a rank-structured environment where there's natural coercion built into the system. Particularly, like, we've had a big problem with basic training at Lackland Air Force Base, where I believe 33 instructors are being court-martialed or disciplined for inappropriate conduct. But those new trainees coming in are taught to respect authority and obey it. So when there's someone above them that's the offender, it's naturally intimidating. So there's got to be some place that they feel that they can go in safety and confidence that's going to look after their interest, to give them advice on how to proceed.
But I guess this would be my last question to both of you, is that, can the culture at sometimes, can culture be more powerful than that it would require legislative change? I understand, the resistance, but will the culture change without it? Sometimes you need that policy to affect culture. Ms. Weber, maybe I can get you to answer that. Do you think it will take legislation to make that culture shift?
Absolutely. I think that's all we're left with at this point. We've given the military over 40 years knowing that this rape stuff was a problem. There's a male rape problem that's called hazing when it's really rape. Let's call a spade a spade. I was violently raped by somebody who victimized me, who manipulated me and said, hey, Private, come around the corner with me. I need to talk to you about your paycheck. When I went around the corner, there was a switch that flipped. I've never seen anything like that before. And this man turned into a violent criminal. And what I'm saying is all these questions about and discussions about hookup cultures, and this is not hookup cultures. These are violent rapes. And if anybody, and they're talking about date rapes, and this is not date rape. We're not talking about, whoops, I slipped and fell in you. This is really serious, violent crime. And to be hearing the leaders of our country and those who have been involved in scandals, talking to me and calling me a hookup culture, when I, in fact, was a virgin when I went into the service and had been with one person when I was raped.
But bottom line, what needs to happen? We're out of time.
I think it's got to be a top-down, bottom-up, everybody committed to this is not tolerated if you do it. Like child molesters are stigmatized. It's got to be if you assault one of your teammates, male or female, you're stigmatized, you're not part of the team.
All right, we're going to leave it there. We appreciate you joining us. There's certainly lots to talk about. I know we will be continuing to explore this. That is all for now, though, from the team in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching Inside Story Americas.